Hello wizards, warlocks, and warriors, welcome to Multiverse. So Baldur's Gate 3 is finally on PlayStation 5. I've been playing for a couple of days. Right now I have roughly 50 hours of gameplay behind me as I'm recording this. Sadly, it's not really 50 hours of gameplay. I'll explain that in just a bit. I will start by talking a bit my experience with the game, and I will keep that part spoiler free. But later on, I will have to mention a few spoilers in order to be able to discuss a few things. So don't worry, once I do reach the part where I will reveal spoilers, I will let you guys know about it. I wish I could say that I love this game. We've been waiting for Baldur's Gate 3 for over 20 years, but this is pretty much a different game with made by different studios, made by different devs, with a different set of rules. So other than the name, it doesn't really have anything to do with Baldur's Gate. So sadly, if you are a fan of Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2, and you're expecting the same experience from Baldur's Gate 3, you might be disappointed. And it's been a mixed blessing for me so far. Basically, I had a whole bunch of issues early in the game. Then later on, it got much better. But then sadly, after a while, I pretty much started hating the game. The reviews for this game has been very overwhelmingly positive, and I can sort of understand why. But sadly, sometimes in the case of some reviews, sometimes they were so busy praising the game because there was no microtransaction in the game that they seem to have given the game a free pass, or they seem to have overlooked a lot of issues that the game seems to have. Also, as I mentioned, we had been waiting for Baldur's Gate 3 for over 20 years at this point. So I guess there were some either hardcore D&D fans or hardcore Baldur's Gate fans that was so happy to get a new Baldur's Gate game that they kind of overlooked a lot of the issues that the game has. The first and biggest issue I had was right when I started the game, the audio would crash. Basically, once I activated the very first console, there's a console you have to activate to have a platform raise up. The audio crashed right there and then. No problem, I figured. Let's just log out and log back in. Sometimes that's all that's needed to fix audio issues, and it did fix it for about 3 seconds, and then the audio crashed again. So I tried to log in, log out, log in, log out, but obviously it wasn't enough to fix the audio issue. It would always crash after 3, 4, 10 seconds. I've seen a similar issues way back when with Pool of Radiance 2. So I started thinking that maybe the save file was corrupted somehow. So I deleted the save file, I recreated a brand new character, while I re-recreated my character, and I started the game again. And again, it lasted for a couple of minutes, and then the audio would crash again. So after quite a few tries like that, at some point I decided to throw in the towel and I played without the audio. So I played without the audio the first day. I guess they added a patch at some point or a hotfix or something, because at some point the audio was fine. And I created a new character just to be sure that maybe the audio crashes at first in the early game, but later on the audio is fine. But now even with a brand new character, the audio is fine. So they seem to have fixed that issue. There's a truckload of issues that are, I would say, minor issues. They're not big issues by themselves, but they are a little bit irritating. And there's a lot of those issues. So after a while, it kind of adds up, and it gets very irritating. One example of that is the rapier. The rapier is supposed to be a finesse weapon. Sadly, the weapon finesse ability of the rapier doesn't seem to work. By itself, it's not a big issue, but there's a lot of issues, of small issues like that get irritating after a while. If I was to describe Baldur's Gate 3 on PlayStation 5 in one word, irritating is the word I would choose. And the game is pretty much focused on combat. Yeah, there are dialogue options you can use to avoid combat sometimes, but sooner or later you'll have no choice but to draw your sword and get into battle. And early on, holy crap, are some of the fights difficult. With my rogue, just the little brains. At some point there's an area where there's 3 brains you have to fight. You have no choice. You cannot really get around them. So you have to fight those 3 brains, and there's your character and there's the cleric character. And holy crap, it was a tough fight. Those freaking brain would one-shot my rogue, and the cleric wasn't much of a fighter. And sadly, early on, there were opponents that were much tougher than those 3 brains, so it was a nightmare in some of the fights. It did get a bit easier once I did get a fighter in the group. And then later on, I got the mage in the group. Sadly, early on, the mage is pretty much useless in D&D. In early levels, mages have very few spells, so they're not very powerful starting on. They get more powerful later on when they get more and more spells. But D&D is pretty much it's very much unforgiving with low-level characters. When you have characters in your party like your mage or your rogue that have like 6 or 8 hit points, it's very easy to be one-shot even by a low-level goblin. So I quickly got rid of my mage. I tried to replace him with a sorcerer, hoping maybe things would be a bit better. But in the end, I replaced him with a barbarian thiefling. Basically, having two fighter type characters made things much easier, especially early in the game. I wouldn't be surprised if a party made up of only fighters goes right through the game very easily. I'm gonna have to give it a try at some point. And sadly, it's not just the mage. The rogue is pretty much useless as well. He pretty much acts as a lesser fighter, sadly, in the game. Some of the rogue abilities, like opening lock or even worse, disarming traps, are pretty much pointless sometimes. To begin with, in order to be able to use those abilities, you have to find the Thieves Kit, Thief Tools, and you have to find Disarm Trap Kits. And even then, you still have to roll for your abilities. So if your dice roll stinks, you're not going to be able to open the lock or disarm the trap. For opening the lock, it's not too bad. Worst comes to worst, you won't be able to get what's in the chest, or you won't be able to open whatever door you're trying to open. Ideally, you would want to have a mage type character that has the spell open lock, but I got rid of my mage character to get an extra fighter. And for the traps, it gets even worse. There's rooms sometimes where there's traps after traps after traps, and even if you need to roll, let's say 10 to disarm the trap, you're still going to fail 50% of the time. So when there's 5, 10, 23 traps in the room, well, you're going to fail at least 10 times. Now, in the case of some traps, there are some ways where you can just trigger the trap. But then again, if you can just have, let's say, your fighter walk through the room and trigger the trap, what do you need a rogue for? And there was this room where there was a whole bunch of traps that would explode and create fire. And there were some other traps also that would be some sort of a poisonous gas. And at first, I saw the trap of the poisonous gas. I was able to detect it, wasn't able to disarm it. I needed 30 to disarm the freaking trap. So there's no way I was able to disarm it. And of course, the trap triggered. And then my characters would die, and I didn't understand why. I understood when I did reload the game. Basically, there was a cloud of poisonous gas around the trap, which I couldn't see before. So half of the time, I could not see the visual effects of the poisonous gas, so I would take damage. I didn't understand why. I would try to raise my character back up. Obviously, it would fall back down, because it was still in the poisonous gas. I just didn't see it. So it was just one more of those 1,000 things that are very irritating about the Baldur's Gate 3, and there's a lot of issues. Yeah, in some cases it's minor issues, but again, when you add up all those minor issues, it becomes a pretty big issue. And sadly, it would seem that Baldur's Gate 3 did get a free pass because some people were so happy that there was no microtransactions in the game. The game has been in early access for 3 years at this point, and not to mention whatever time they took to actually develop the game. So I was very surprised to see that there was so many issues left in the game. And the scary part is that I saw some reviews saying that Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have as many bugs, as many issues as some of their previous games, which was pretty much a backhanded compliment. Basically, they were pretty much telling us that there was a lot of issues with Baldur's Gate 3, but not as much as the previous games, so that was okay. Also, they would mention that early in the game, there's not that many issues, but there's a lot more issues as you go towards the end game. And I find that a bit scary because already I saw a lot of issues with the game, so I can only imagine how bad it gets once you reach the end game. So it's been a bit of a bumpy ride. So earlier on there was quite a few issues. Also there was a bit of a learning curve, I guess, to understand how the game actually works. So after a while things got much easier again. Once I managed to get 2 fighters into the group, it made the game a lot easier. And I was able to progress well enough at that point. But then I reached a point where I really started hating the game. I'll just mention the shadow map. If you play the game, you'll understand what I mean. Holy crap, I hated that area, and I've been hating the game ever since I went through that part. Actually, I did not go through that part just yet. I'm still working my way trying to get through that part, and it's freaking annoying. If the game was irritating so far, that whole area is irritating times 1,000. Holy crap. This is like my third or fourth attempt at making this video, and at some point I was mentioning how I was on the fence about the game. I didn't know if I loved it or if I hated it. Although as I was editing my video, I played a bit more and came to decide that I hate the game. It's quite simple. At this point, I hate the game. It'll take a small miracle for me to start loving it. I freaking hate the darn thing. Hate it, hate it, hate it. So should you get this game? If you are a huge D&D fan, yeah, you probably should. But if you are a huge Baldur's Gate fan, this game, other than the name, this game has really nothing in common with Baldur's Gate. So it could easily be Pool of Radiance 3. It could be Temple of Elemental Evil 2. It could have been any other D&D modules. Heck, it could be just a generic D&D game number 25. There's nothing really linking it to Baldur's Gate 3 so far. Although later in the game we are supposed to go to Baldur's Gate. So when that happens, maybe that will change my mind. But so far, it could be any generic D&D game and it would be the same thing. So now we've reached the point where we have to talk about spoilers. So if you don't want to get any spoiler about the game, stop watching right now. Go play the game, and then once you're done playing the game, come back, give us your comments. We'll be very happy to see you back here. So the spoiler warning is behind us. Let's get this party started. I was a bit surprised that the game pretty much starts the same way DC Universe Online starts. Basically, you get kidnapped by some evil alien. The evil alien puts you in a pod, then they insert something to you that gives you some sort of powers. You escape the pod, and then you have to escape the alien ship. If I was to give you that description, am I talking about DC Universe Online or am I talking about Baldur's Gate 3? It's actually both. Both are pretty much starting the very same way. Although DC Universe Online was made like 12 years ago, so unless they started coming up with that story like 20 years ago, DC Universe Online came first. But it's just a bit strange that out of all the way they could start a D&D campaign, they started the game the same way as DC Universe Online. So that did make me smile at least a little bit. So you start by having to escape the evil alien ship. And early on you get a fighter that joins your group, a Get Yankee fighter. And then afterwards you can free a cleric from a pod. And even with those three characters, holy crap, the first fight against the brains, there's a couple of brains, I'm not sure how to properly call them, walking brains. Oh yeah, and I even had a brain on my side. So it was me, the brain, the fighter, and the cleric. And holy crap, just fighting three of those brains, that was a pretty big fight for my group. And then afterwards, there is this evil illithid that's fighting some sort of a dragon-type creature. Or was it a demon? I'm not sure. Either way, trying to fight the illithid and the one demon was freaking difficult, and even worse, when you start fighting the demon, then two other demons comes to help him out. So that's pretty much an unwinnable fight, which did seem to be the point. You don't seem to be able or to be supposed to win the fight or even to fight them. There's a control panel that you have to go to. So you have to try to hurry up towards the control panel, but there are some evil creatures between you and that panel. So you have to kind of try to avoid them and activate the panel. And once you do that, you end up in some sort of a beach type area. So you pretty much start the game with your character and your friend the cleric. And early on there's a fight against three brains. Holy crap, that fight was a nightmare. I tried to avoid them, and there was this sort of temple that I was able to unlock the door, and I was able to get into the temple. But sadly, there was a whole bunch of traps, and my character was useless against those traps. And even some of the locked doors or locked chests, I did not have any thieves' tools, so I wasn't able to unlock anything. So sadly, that should have been seen as a warning at how useless the thief would be in this game. Oh well. So after the uber fight against the three evil brains, I was able then to find the Gichinki fighter. So that did help a bit, but even with one fighter, some of the fights were freaking difficult. And adding a mage to the party really didn't help. So when we got the option to add the Tiefling Barbarian to the group, I got rid of the mage, and I continued playing with two fighter type characters. So that did make the game a lot easier. Sadly, a lot of the game is geared towards combat, And in combat, you want fighter type characters. You don't want to have a bunch of rogues. You don't want to have mages. You want to have fighters in the fighting game because this is pretty much what this is. The game seems to be pretty much balanced around the fighting characters. And even the rogue seems to be treated as some sort of a lesser fighter that can do about a bunch of damage with its backstab abilities. Oh, my bad, this is a 5th edition. I should say sneak attack abilities. So once I got my two fighters, things became much easier. Yeah, there's a lot of options in the dialogues that you can use to try to avoid combat, but sooner or later, either you will fail your role, so you will have to fight, or in some cases, it doesn't matter what you say, all the options lead you to fighting your way out. And despite all the dialogue options, it's very easy to say the wrong thing and end up having to kill everyone. And the sad part is that let's say you say the wrong thing and then the person you're talking to wants to fight. There's no option really to say no, I don't want to fight or stop fighting, or not only do you have to defeat that person, but you have to defeat the whole group. Like as soon as the fight gets triggered, everyone in the room wants to fight and you have to wipe everyone. So I pretty much ended up having to wipe all the druids, and when I did that, the druids decided to attack the tieflings, and then there was this whole battle between the tieflings and the druids. And by the time I was done with defeating the druids were dead, the tieflings were dead. I think there was like one tiefling still standing, and that was it. Everyone was dead. They were dead. And then later on, I pretty much ended up killing every goblins in the goblin camp. And by the time I left the first map, the map was a wasteland. Like pretty much everyone in the map was dead, except for a couple of characters. Although if you like exploring the map, that first map you will have a lot of exploration to do. Not only can you explore the whole map, but there's also the underground you can explore, or there's even the goblin lair that you can explore. The goblin lair is fairly big. There's a couple levels to the goblin lair. So if you like to explore, that first map is pretty awesome for that. Sadly, the second map, not so much. The second map is much smaller. There's not a lot going on that map. And sadly, once more, through various dialogue options, I pretty much ended up killing half of the Githyanki's. I probably could have killed them all, but at some point, as I killed about roughly half of them, I said, okay, enough. I killed everyone in the first map. I'm not going to do that again, so I left before I would have to wipe everyone, which might have been a mistake. I guess we'll have to wait and see for that. And that third map, I hate that third map. Although, it may be my fault. I probably did something wrong, but I freaking hate that map. It's freaking annoying to navigate. I hate it. Basically, there is some sort of shadow curse on the map. In order to be able to resist the curse or push away the curse, you have to carry torches with your characters. So I equipped a torch to every one of my characters, and off we went to explore the map. And then at some point, and things were going well, the torches did seem to do a good job at keeping the darkness away. And then at some point we saw some sort of a convoy, and there was an evil drider in the convoy, and he did have a big lamp that was really doing a really good job at pushing away the darkness. And through the dialogues, I was able to convince the drider to let us join his group, and he pretty much escorted us to the tower, which was most likely a mistake, because once we reached the tower, then the drider disappeared or left, and I never saw him again, and he left with the lamp. So no more lamp to be able to navigate the darkness. And at first I didn't worry too much. I thought, okay, well we'll just carry the torches, not a big deal. It turns out it is a big deal, because from there on we could not travel through the map even with the torches. So sadly after that, when I would try to travel through the map, the game would go into turn-based, and it became a freaking nightmare to navigate through the map. And if I tried to turn off the turn-based, and after 2-3 seconds, my characters die because they get damaged from the darkness or whatever. So sadly, the obvious mistake I made was not to kill the drider and take the lamp, or somehow try to convince him to give me the lamp. Oh well. And I foolishly thought that surely there's another lamp somewhere that I will be able to use. Sadly, so far, the answer is no. So at some point I didn't really know what to do, so I went back to the first map. I tried to see if there was maybe a few things that I missed the first time around. And there was the lair of the hag that I hadn't gone to at that point. So I decided to go back there, and I was able to get into the lair. And again, that's where I encountered traps after traps after traps, and traps that required 30 in order to be able to disarm those traps, meaning that I just couldn't disarm those traps. And that's also where there was the poisonous gas. That I didn't see the poisonous gas because the visual effects wasn't there. So at some point I started being a bit desperate. I started thinking that if I gave maybe more sleight of hands to my character, it would be easier to disarm traps. Nah, it didn't help. My character was as useless against traps as before. There is this NPC in your camp that you can use to be able to change your character if you need to. So I used it to be able to change just a few things. Basically, I tried to give more sleight of hand to my character. Sadly, in order to give him more sleight of hand, I had to take away some perception. So it was a lose-lose scenario. Because if you don't have perception, you don't see the trap. But if you do have perception and don't have sleight of hand, you cannot disarm the freaking trap. Although, even with sleight of hand, sometimes you cannot disarm the freaking trap. So it was literally a lose-lose-lose scenario. So I tried to go back and see if maybe there were some items that I hadn't picked up. Maybe there's some quests maybe that I skipped without meaning to. Maybe some NPCs I could talk to that I didn't talk to before. But after a while, I had no choice. I had to go back to the tower. And again, I started exploring and looking and looking and looking, and I just couldn't find a way to be able to get through the darkness. So I started being a bit desperate. So I did something that I probably shouldn't have done. I tried to go into one of the rooms that had a red door that you couldn't go into. So basically, as I tried to get into the room, one of the evil guard came to see me, and he arrested me. I did not resist. I did let him arrest me because I was trying to open up more options. Obviously, I was stuck. I didn't know what else to do. So I figured, let's see where this leads to, and maybe I'll open up other options. And actually, it did. It did kind of open a few options. So I was able to escape from the prison. I ended up into some sort of underground caverns, and there were some evil creatures waiting for me there, but I was able to avoid them. And then I was able to find my way back into the tower, so I grabbed my party because basically I had been by myself when I got arrested. So I was able to grab my party. I went into where the boat was, and I was able to take the boat to an area that was protected from the darkness. And also, I met Jaira from Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2. So I had a bit of a glimmer of hope. I thought, holy crap, maybe I will be able to find some light here that will allow me to travel through the darkness. And as luck would have it, Jaira told me that there was an NPC that could create a globe of light that would allow me to travel through the darkness. Then I was doing the happy dance. At last, I found what I was looking for. But sadly, the game broke my heart one more time. There was this character that was pretending to be a flaming fist character that turned out to be some sort of evil demon creature. I was able to unmask him, and then the fight started. And then out of nowhere, half a dozen, maybe more demonic type creatures appeared, and it was a pretty huge fight. And then the game did something that I hate. It cheated. Basically, halfway through the fight, the fake flaming fist character grabbed the NPC that I needed to talk to, and he flew away with her. So basically, the devs had a scripted event in the middle of the fight so that we couldn't talk to the character. If there's something I hate more than a game that has bugs and issues, it's a game that cheats. Whenever the game cheats, I hate that. And sadly, it would seem that the devs really did not want us to win that fight, so halfway through the fight, the guy leaves with the NPC. But then, it got even worse. Once the fight was over and we pretty much won or defeated all the NPCs that were left, then we went straight back into combat because somehow the darkness corrupted pretty much every NPCs other than Jaira. So it was us and Jaira fighting pretty much everyone on the map. And already the previous fight was pretty tough, and now we ended up in a situation where most of our spells were spent. Most of the group pretty much had only half of their hit points left. So we went from one very tough fight to another very tough fight. And even worse, like during the fight, as we would defeat enemies, more and more and more enemies would spawn. There was some sort of weird creature type that would spawn. There was some big, huge vines that would spawn. There was some sort of ghouls that would spawn. So we kept on fighting waves and waves and waves of enemies. So that quickly turned into pretty much an unwinnable fight. And when Jaheira died, I knew we were done for. And that had been a pretty long playthrough without any save in between. So sadly, I had to start way back from even way before I even took the boat to go to that area. Also, I came to realize at some point that when I was sent to jail, all my weapons were gone, and pretty much all my supplies, most of my gear was gone. I still had my clothes, but that was pretty much it. A lot of the supplies I had were carried by my main character, so I lost almost everything. All my toolkits were gone, my thieves kits, my disarm trap kits. I had to get some new short swords for my character, which were nowhere near as good as the ones I had before. One was pretty much a legendary item. So now I had a new quest, trying to get my items back. I kind of suspected that it must have been in some chest in the prison area. And sadly, I had no more thieves' tools, so I could not pick the locks of the chests. So my other option was to try to pickpocket the keys from one of the guards. But as soon as you do pickpocket one of the characters, again the guards appear and they give you the option to either fight or go back into prison. I was able to pickpocket the character and then to go look into the chest for if my gear was there, and I was able to find after a few attempts I was able to find in which chest my gear was. But again, as soon as I pickpocket the character, the fight starts, and it's pretty much an unwinnable fight. So even if you defeat the character, there's waves and waves and waves of character that come by until your whole group is defeated. And even then, even if you somehow you manage to win the fight, what then? Like sure, if you manage to win the fight, yeah, you get your gear back. But then I will end up in a situation where I will have to kill everyone in the tower because they will all turn hostile. And that is when I decided that I hate this freaking game. Because there's no way to be able to get your gear back. And traveling through the map with the darkness, if you don't have the light, is a nightmare. At some point my cleric did have a spell in order to be able to create a bright light. I thought this might work, you seem to be able to cast it on an object. So I thought, okay, let's use that and see if maybe that could work as a light. It didn't work, obviously. And sadly, that's where I'm at with the game. Very frustrated, very irritated, and at this point I pretty much hate the freaking thing. Heck, I was very tempted to uninstall the whole thing after Jaheira died, but I'll just take a break instead, and I might come back to the game in a day or two. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. I saw a lot of people saying that Baldur's Gate 3 was the closest thing we had to playing D&D on the computer, and I would be tempted to agree if that means playing D&D with a dungeon master that's trying to be a little too clever for his own good. Sadly, after waiting over 20 years for Baldur's Gate 3, I cannot say that I have a very good experience with Baldur's Gate 3 so far, and I'm very irritated with the game. We have waited so long for this game that I really wanted to love it. Sadly, right now, it's pretty much the opposite. Again, this is not really Baldur's Gate. At the end of the day, it's made by a different studio, by different devs. It's like playing D&D with a different dungeon master, and sadly, if you play with a different dungeon master, obviously the result will be different. So maybe this should not be called Baldur's Gate 3. Maybe this should be called Divine Divinity Original Sin 5. Who knows? So there you go, guys. So again, a reminder, I'm about 50 hours into the game. Maybe later on things will get better. Let's hope so.